This is the United Kingdom, a nation that once ruled nearly a quarter of the world's land area, which now forms, fully or partially, what are today more or less 72 independent countries. It was once one of the richest, most advanced, and fastest-growing economies in the world. But today, the situation is quite different. The UK's National Health Service faces a shortage of 100,000 full-time doctors, nurses, and other staff. Government-run schools are struggling with a lack of teachers, and many school buildings are in a dire state of disrepair. In short, the problems that one would expect in a third-world backward country and other developing nations are now plaguing the UK as well. Before we dive into the reasons behind this economic decline, take a look at these two lines on the graph. This represents the GDP per capita of the United Kingdom and the United States. Until the 2008 financial crisis, there wasn't a significant difference between the two countries' GDP per capita. But after the crisis, the US economy surged ahead, while the UK's remained stagnant. When analyzing economic growth among G7 nations after COVID-19, the UK was the worst-performing economy in 2020. Similarly, the UK's productivity growth has also been stagnant since 2008. Productivity refers to the output produced per hour by a worker. But the issue doesn't stop there. In 2022, India surpassed the UK to become the world's fifth-largest economy. Some estimates suggest that by 2025, the UK will continue to be the worst-performing economy among the G7 nations. So the big question is, why has productivity stalled in the country that pioneered the Industrial Revolution? Is manufacturing no longer taking place? And why has the UK struggled to recover while most other nations have rebounded from the crises of the last 2 decades, including COVID-19 and the 2008 financial crash? Today's video will focus on the UK's economic decline and the factors that contributed to it. Let's get started. Although the economic downturn became severe after 2008, its roots were planted long before. The UK was a manufacturing-based economy until the mid-20th century. However, between 1973 and 2007, its manufacturing sector lagged behind other developed nations like the US, Japan, France, and Germany. In fact, at certain points, the UK's manufacturing sector even experienced negative growth. Manufacturing is crucial for productivity growth, as it creates jobs for both skilled and unskilled workers. However, instead of focusing on manufacturing, the UK's economy became increasingly dependent on the services sector, especially financial services. While advanced economies often have a strong services sector, the downside is that these industries primarily require highly skilled workers, leaving fewer opportunities for unskilled labor. After the 2008 financial crisis, the government took massive loans to bail out the financial sector, but largely ignored the struggling manufacturing sector. This lack of investment further hindered productivity growth. In the years that followed, even the financial sector did not perform as expected. Additionally, the UK has lagged significantly in the tech sector. So much so that, as of today, not a single European country has a trillion-dollar tech company. The UK's largest tech firm, Aveva, is worth only a fraction of the major US tech giants, standing at around 1% of the size of companies like Google. Meanwhile, the US has 6 technology companies: Apple, Microsoft, Google, Alphabet, Amazon, Nvidia, and Meta, each valued at over $1 trillion. This stark contrast highlights how the UK has largely missed the 21st century tech revolution, failing to produce global tech giants on the scale of its American counterparts. In 2010, Conservative Prime Minister David Cameron introduced strict economic measures to reduce the debt incurred during the financial crisis. Taxes were raised by up to 50%, and public spending was cut drastically through austerity measures. These cuts severely impacted healthcare, with reduced spending leading to an overburdened NHS, outdated medical equipment, and staff shortages. By early 2023, the NHS had a shortfall of 100,000 full-time doctors, nurses, and other staff. Budget cuts also affected schools, leading to staff shortages and deteriorating school buildings. As of today, the UK's education budget is £15 billion less than it was in 2010, which is equivalent to 2006 spending levels. Essentially, British citizens were paying high taxes but not receiving the quality of services they expected in return. Even now, the UK's highest tax rate stands at 45%. The UK was still recovering from the financial crisis when discussions about Brexit began. At the time, no one knew the outcome of the referendum or how trade relations with the European Union would be affected. Although the Brexit vote took place in 2016, uncertainty surrounding it led to a decline in private investments even before the official departure. This was the first major shock to the UK economy. When the referendum results were announced, 52% voting to leave the EU versus 48% to remain, businesses faced a second major setback. Even though the UK officially remained an EU member until 2020, new trade barriers, customs checks, and regulatory differences began to emerge. These complications increased the cost of doing business, disrupted supply chains, and created logistical delays. As a result, between 2016 and 2020, the British economy failed to gain any meaningful traction. Just as Brexit was finalized in 2020, the world was hit by another major crisis, COVID-19. The pandemic had a devastating impact on the UK's economy, making it the worst-performing economy among G7 nations that year. Businesses were already suffering from investment shortages, and COVID-related disruptions worsened the situation. The government was slow to impose lockdowns, allowing cases to rise dramatically and further straining the already struggling NHS. To counter the pandemic's effects, then-Chancellor Rishi Sunak announced a £280 billion relief package. At the time, the interest rate was at a historic low of 0.1%, making borrowing seem manageable. However, inflation was already high, and when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, global energy prices surged, worsening inflation. To combat rising prices, the Bank of England raised interest rates to 5.25%, significantly increasing the cost of debt repayment for the government. Another issue plaguing the UK's economy is labor inactivity. Unlike other G7 nations where unemployment declined post-pandemic, the UK saw an increase in the number of people who stopped working altogether. Many individuals took early retirement due to long-term illnesses, increasing the economic burden on the country. These inactive workers neither contribute to the economy nor seek employment, making them different from the unemployed population. Another major factor contributing to the UK's economic struggles is the worsening housing crisis and rising cost of living. Property prices and rents have surged, particularly in London and other major cities, making homeownership increasingly unattainable for younger generations. Simultaneously, wages have failed to keep up with inflation, leaving many households struggling with basic expenses like energy, food, and transportation. Adding to this pressure is the UK's aging population, one of the fastest growing in Europe. With a shrinking workforce and increasing demand for pensions and healthcare services, the economic burden on the younger working population is intensifying. The post-Brexit decline in immigration has further exacerbated labor shortages in essential sectors such as healthcare, hospitality, and agriculture, creating an economic imbalance that threatens long-term growth. The UK's economic stagnation stems from a combination of factors, including the decline of manufacturing, over-reliance on services, the financial crisis, Brexit, COVID-19, heavy debt, labor inactivity, skilled worker shortages, and geopolitical events like the Ukraine war. These issues have collectively pushed the UK further behind in the global economic race. Interestingly, some surveys now suggest that many people who voted for Brexit in 2016 are now regretting their decision. Additionally, the UK's political instability in recent years has also played a role in its economic downturn. The United Kingdom has also faced significant political turmoil in recent years, with a rapid turnover of prime ministers. Since the Brexit referendum in 2016, the country has seen 5 different leaders: Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, and Rishi Sunak, all struggling to navigate economic challenges, political divisions, and internal party conflicts. Liz Truss, in particular, made history by serving the shortest tenure as prime minister, lasting just 49 days. Meanwhile, Scottish nationalism has been on the rise, with increasing demands for a second independence referendum. The Scottish National Party, SNP, has consistently pushed for separation from the UK, arguing that Scotland's interests are not adequately represented in Westminster, particularly after Brexit. This ongoing crisis reflects deep fractures within the UK's political landscape, raising questions about the stability and future of the Union itself. So, what do you think? Can policy changes help the UK recover, or is it destined to remain in economic decline? Would rejoining the European Union help reverse these issues? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more insightful content. See you in the next one.